Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast, and this is number 115. I'm Jim Cornell, and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. This podcast is sponsored by Vetter, a globally leading CDMO with over 70 years of experience as a responsible, independent family business. Driven by more than 6,600 employees worldwide, Vetter provides life-saving injectable drug products to the patients that rely on them most. Vetter partners with its customers throughout the entire product lifecycle, starting in the early phase of drug development with comprehensive expertise and support in clinical manufacturing for in-human trial material. For more information, visit vetter-pharma.com/labiotech. That's vetter-pharma.com/labiotech. This week on the podcast, we're talking about the next generation of gene therapy. Now, gene therapy is often in the news, but are we on the cusp of the industry moving to a new generation of treatments? And what about the challenges and barriers to bringing new gene therapies to market, particularly as they expand into more prevalent diseases? To help answer these questions, this week our guest on the podcast is Michael Parini, CEO of Spur Therapeutics, a US company dedicated to developing next-generation gene therapies for people living with chronic debilitating diseases. So I wonder if first you could tell me then a little bit about the history of the company.
Yeah, so Spur Therapeutics, we founded the company actually just this year, and it really was a result of, a lot of hard work and progress at Freeline Therapeutics, which was our sort of predecessor company. And then we had an opportunity to acquire another company, Swan Bio. And when we put the two together, we felt like it was a good opportunity to sort of take a step back and think about, who we are and what we're trying to accomplish. I think Spur signifies our ambition to take gene therapy to sort of the next frontier of diseases, which for us is more prevalent diseases where you have an opportunity to impact even more patients' lives. And so we want to sort of spur the field of gene therapy forward. So we announced that name change earlier this year. It's been really well received by our employees. Certainly our investors are supportive of it as well. So it's been exciting. It's been a lot of fun so far. We have two clinical stage programs. We have one for Gaucher disease, one for adrenomyeloneuropathy, which is a rare neurodegenerative disease without a treatment today. We follow that with a really exciting pipeline of bold programs, including one in Parkinson's disease, which sort of builds on the work we've done in Gaucher. And then we have another project that's a little bit earlier in research, going after a very severe form of congestive heart failure. And our approach is really to optimize each and every component of our product candidates to make sure that we're getting to the right cells with the right levels of expression, the right uptake in those cells in a way that doesn't just provide a therapeutic benefit, but provides a transformative one over and above what the standard of care is today. We're making great progress on that front. We're moving into phase 3 with our Gaucher program next year, and then quickly following it with readouts for AMN and moving into the clinic with Parkinson's disease. So super exciting time to be at the company, and we're excited about the progress we've made.
Gene therapy seems to be always in the news, and no less so this year. I wonder if you could kind of give us a bit of a snapshot as to where the gene therapy field is at right now.
Yeah, I think, gene therapy, I think from our perspective is really at an inflection point. It's a technology that's been around for a while. And like any disruptive technology, it sort of goes through waves and phases of development. And I think, early days with gene therapy, there was a lot of learning, trial and error, and a lot of learning about what is the best way to deploy this new technology to ultimately develop therapeutics that have value to patients and healthcare systems. And so we've seen that first wave of innovation give way to a set of products and programs that are either in the clinic or even approved at this point. And I think what we've learned from that is they sort of fit into two categories, Jim. The first was, there's an exciting technology. It is, gene transfer. You put a healthy, normal gene in a person and they get to produce some protein that they were missing. And that's exciting. But I think what the first group of products tried to do is basically take advantage of the technology. That was the innovation. We could have constant expression of a therapeutic protein. And I think in a lot of those instances, the product profiles that emerged were, more convenient, but the efficacy was around the same as existing treatments. And in some of those diseases like hemophilia A, existing treatments were quite good. So you had the innovation in the technology, but you didn't necessarily have those therapeutic outcomes that were better. And I think that's been a harder set of products to advance and have success with. I think another set of products from that sort of first wave of innovation really they leveraged the technology to provide a solution where there was no treatment available, very severe diseases where they've had a meaningful impact in those patients' lives. And those products have done quite well. So I think at Spur, we sort of looked at the field and said, all right, I think us, like a few others, have said, there's a room to take this set of diseases, really be focused on where you go, really be focused on how you deploy the technology to really leverage the modality, but continue to think about what makes a new medicine impactful. And that's really just being better than the medicines that exist today. The gene therapy doesn't get a pass on that requirement. You need to show a better clinical outcome. And that's really been our focus. And I think, we have a somewhat unique approach to doing that. And I think we feel like 201, our FLT 201, has really been a nice opportunity to demonstrate that.
You mentioned what's gone before. What are some of the challenges that are still existing for gene therapies, and how can some of those maybe be solved?
Yeah, I think, the field has learned a lot. There's no question about it. I look at I'll use us as an example. I look at our portfolio, and we used to have products where gene therapy was focused on essentially making the product more convenient for patients. And those were some of our older programs. And we took a step back a few years ago and said, is that really where gene therapy should be playing? Because what you see in those programs is a lot of upfront investment, very, very costly clinical development and manufacturing to produce something that kind of works in a similar way to what's out there today. And so when we set out at Spur, we said, all right, well, how do we figure out what we want to do to be differentiated? And, I'll use a couple products as an example for how we think the field is moving. FLT 201 is our lead program in Gaucher disease. When we set out to do that project, we sort of took, in the beginning, I would say, a first generation gene therapy approach. We used a capsid that we had, which was proprietary, but really tried to use sort of an off-the-shelf wild type transgene, sort of the DNA sequencing that encodes to the protein. And what we saw was we could probably do the same as enzyme replacement therapy, but that wasn't good enough for us. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board and said, we want to do better. And I think that's the hallmark of sort of the next wave of innovation, is having clinical outcomes that are better than what exists today. And so we did some protein engineering, really tailored the transgene to produce, a variant of GCase called GCase85 that has incredible properties over the wild type. It's much more stable. It lasts longer in the blood. It lasts longer in cells, which are really the problems with enzyme replacement therapy. It's a very short half-life. Patients get it, and it doesn't get to all the cells that it needs to, including bone in particular, which is an area of unmet need for Gaucher patients. And so when we developed GCase85, we're seeing it stay in the blood longer. We're seeing it reach those cells. We're seeing it stay in the cells longer. And it's reducing the harmful substrate and really changing the course of the disease for these patients. And so when I think about gene therapy and sort of how it moves forward to the next wave, it really is about optimizing each and every component of the product. It's not off-the-shelf capsid and off-the-shelf transgene. It's got to be a capsid that's really designed to address the cells that need to be transduced and expression and uptake in all the cells that need to be treated. It's got to be a transgene that produces a therapeutic, protein that adds value above and beyond what exists today. And of course, it needs to do it in a way that's safe. You also need, in gene therapy, to really check a couple other boxes. You need a durable treatment. I think that's an area where, again, if you're going to give a one-time treatment, it's got to last. We see that's an area that we've spent a lot of time focused on. We have a capsid that really has a track record from prior programs of having really nice durability out past 5 years. That's something I think patients and healthcare systems are going to expect. And you also need something that honestly you could scale and make safely and produce and make it accessible to patients. And so, our treatment today is a 1 hour infusion. That's quite different than some of the other genetic approaches out there where patients need to undergo chemotherapy and have their cells mobilized, and a much more disruptive intervention in terms of a therapeutic approach. So we really see a nice opportunity here, but you gotta approach it the right way, and I think we're focused on doing that.
Now that gene therapy has been well established, we hear about next generation gene therapy. I wonder how you would characterize what that means.
Yeah, I think early on, I think that there was a tremendous appetite to have a platform approach, right? Where you have a platform that you just sort of plug and play different transgenes into, and you can go after one disease today with this platform and another disease tomorrow with the same platform. I think that's sort of a first generation approach. I understand why that was the field, and that's what we all tried to do early on. But I think you really need to evolve your thinking and make each and every product precisely tailored to what you're trying to accomplish. And when I look at Parkinson's disease, it's a great example for us. We have GCase85, which is this enhanced enzyme that really is showing a difference in Gaucher, and I think it's having a huge impact. There are a subset of Parkinson's disease patients who have the same mutation as Gaucher patients, a mutation in the GBA1 gene that causes them to not have an enzyme that's needed to clear out substrate in cells and maintain cellular health. We took the GCase85 and said, how do we leverage it in this Parkinson's disease program? But we didn't just take it, put it in a capsid and stick it into the CNS setting. We stopped. We spent, frankly, over a year now optimizing the construct to make sure that it is engaging the right cells in a CNS setting. The cells are different than what we're addressing in Gaucher, which was a liver-directed treatment. Making sure that it's having the right levels of expression, we're getting cellular uptake in the right parts of the brain at the right levels, and we're doing it in a way that causes the least amount of cellular distress, because you are introducing a virus and a therapeutic to cells. It does cause a cellular stress. And so we've really focused on optimizing that efficacy safety balance. Now what we're doing is we're looking at, well, what's the best way to get it to the CNS setting, right? It's a different setting than liver. And so again, I think this wave of innovation is going to really require incredible thoughtfulness at each step of putting together your program candidates. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we're seeing really nice success in Gaucher with that approach. So we're taking that forward. And I think it is sort of the next wave of innovation, is not using a one size fits all, but really specifically optimizing each and every product you have for the disease that you're trying to treat in the setting that you're trying to treat it.
I think while in some respects it's a little bit unfair to mention money, one of the knocks against gene therapies has often been the cost. Do you see that can be reduced and that this can be something that could be extended to more people globally?
Yeah, it's certainly top of mind for us and all innovative life sciences companies. And making medicines that people can't get doesn't really help the world. And I think that's something we all appreciate. It doesn't help us either, because we are trying to create something that is sustainable in terms of continued investment in the future. I think that there are different kinds of diseases. For rare diseases, right now you look at Gaucher is a perfect example. Gaucher patients in most of the Western world have pretty good access to enzyme replacement therapy, but it's quite expensive, right? It's $300,000 to $500,000 a year for the rest of their life to take their ERT. And so when you sort of think about the Gaucher patient journey and the impact on them and the healthcare system, they're diagnosed, usually late teens, early 20s, and then they go on therapy for decades at $300,000 to $500,000 a year. So when we talk to payers, a one-time treatment that's durable, that has not just the same efficacy, but better efficacy and a clean safety profile, we've had really positive response, certainly from payers that see the bigger picture. And I think that's a case where we can actually receive a fair price, but also create a lot of value and value savings for the healthcare system. As we and others start moving into bigger diseases where there are more patients and we're outside of the rare setting, I do think we need to start focused on some efficiencies. And I think that's where you need to get the cost of development down. And there are a couple ways to do that, Jim. The first is manufacturing. When Spur/Freeline started back in 2015, the cost of manufacturing was quite high. It was sort of a new technology. Manufacturing is expensive. This is not small molecule manufacturing. These are complex organisms that you need to put into a very specific setting to make them with high parameters around quality and control. And so what we see is, how do we build scale in areas where you don't need differentiation manufacturing to drive those costs down? And we've seen it in our projects where, the costs of making a dose of our treatment have gone down considerably just since 2015. And so I think that's an area that's really ripe for continued innovation, continued efficiency, and building scale at a broader level for gene therapy. And that's happening, and that's encouraging me. The other piece of this, of course, is how do you design your intervention to be as cost effective as possible? And I think we're starting to really see that opportunity in some of our projects. Like, we have a congestive heart failure project where we know this is not a rare disease. The patient population is, 10 to 20,000 patients a year suffer from this condition. If we're going to deploy a gene therapy, we need to do it in a smart way where we can really do it efficiently and secure the right kind of cost profile. That's not going to be some of these, multi-million-dollar price tags that you see on some of the, rare disease conditions where there's only a certain number of patients that you could treat as a company. So I think that's an area where, again, innovation with how you approach the disease, how you administer it, how much product you need, and you could enhance all those things by doing what we're doing, which is really targeting the therapeutic, getting more out of each component in a synergistic way. So you have lower doses and you can really drive a better cost profile for your product. I'd say the last thing is the regulatory environment. We're seeing certainly, across our discussions with regulators, a real appetite to use, biomarkers and other early indicators because it does speed up development in an appropriate way. If you have a really clear biomarker that says, if this is being improved, it will translate into benefits. That helps companies like us do things more efficiently in the front end because clinical trials are very expensive, as you know. So the more we can do efficiently in terms of manufacturing, in terms of dose and using the innovation that we've created to sort of be more efficient with the product we're producing, and then a cleaner and clearer regulatory path, I think it'll make a difference and it'll make these treatments just a lot more accessible in the future.
Are there other companies working on these next generation gene therapies, not necessarily the same diseases that you're looking at?
We're at the start of that process. I mean, we like to think we're kind of in the vanguard here and at the forefront of it. I do think for some of the reasons I mentioned in terms of efficiency, a lot of companies use sort of platform approaches to address these things. And I think, again, from my perspective, the goal here has to be a very specific, tailored approach to treat the disease you're going after. And I think it would be unreasonable to think an approach that treats a systemic disease like Gaucher is going to be the same approach that works in a CNS setting like Parkinson's. And so you do have to put the work in to really target. And I think we're seeing some companies start that process. But I think for us, we hope to be the leaders there and really demonstrate the value of this approach. And I think like other things in the life sciences world, once you start seeing that value and that validation, I think you'll see a bunch of others follow.
You already mentioned a little bit about FLT201 and Gaucher disease. I wonder if you could kind of go into a bit more detail on Gaucher disease, how it's treated and how you're tackling it.
Yeah, so our lead program, FLT201, is for Gaucher disease type 1, which is the most common form of the disease. There's 3 types. This one is about 95% of patients have type 1. And it's caused by mutations in their genome that don't allow them to make an enzyme, GCase, which is critical in your cells to break down fatty lipids that build up through cellular processes. When you don't have this enzyme, these substrates build up in the cells, causing cellular dysfunction and death. And you end up having a number of symptoms that are quite debilitating. These patients have enlarged organs. These patients have fatigue, they have pain, they have severe bone impairment, which leads to fractures and bone pain. They have lung dysfunction. And so you see this affect about 18,000 patients. If you look at the US, basically big markets in the EU and Israel. So it's a rare disease, but it affects a lot of people and their families. What they've had to date is treatments like enzyme replacement therapy, which is sort of the standard of care today. And while it's been effective in some things, it hasn't fully addressed the disease. Patients, 60% of patients continue to have symptoms despite being on enzyme replacement for years. And there are areas that really don't get addressed because enzyme replacement therapy, as I mentioned, has a really short half-life. And so when you look at patients that present with Gaucher, even being on treatment for years, they still have bone impairment, they still have lung dysfunction, they still have pain and fatigue. And I think that's where we see a real opportunity to sort of address some of these areas of unmet need.
Where are you at with clinical trials?
Yeah, so FLT201 is in the clinic. It's one of our key clinical programs. It is our lead asset as an organization. And we've made great progress. We are in phase 1/2 development. Unlike small molecules, you don't really have a phase 1 that stands alone because you are treating patients, just given the severity of these diseases and the nature of the treatment, which is sort of a one-time treatment. We've treated 6 patients in our phase 1/2. We've completed enrollment. We've seen really, really fantastic results in terms of both safety and efficacy. And now we're in discussions with regulators about how do we move this quickly forward into our pivotal trial to get it to patients as fast as possible. And there's a couple really nice opportunities that the regulators have provided, recognizing if you have a treatment that could be a meaningful advance over treatments today, there are pathways both in Europe as well as in the US and the UK that allow you to have early and frequent conversations. RMAT, PRIME, ILAP are designations that are afforded to treatments that could be true advances for patients above and beyond the standard of care. And so we've secured all of those designations. We're having those conversations with regulators, and we're going to start our pivotal trial, our registrational trial, just next year. So we're super excited about that.
Is it a cure or is it maintenance, or what's the measure of success, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. So preclinically, we saw really exciting things. And I think that's always sort of the basis of moving into development. Companies always get excited about getting into the clinic because you can really see, hey, has our innovation translated? And so in our program, we've treated, as I mentioned, 6 patients with FLT201. And, they all came in with varying forms of unmet needs. There is a fair amount of heterogeneity as patients present. Every patient was on treatment for at least 2 years. So these patients have been treated by enzyme replacement therapy or another therapy called substrate reduction therapy for 2 years, at least, most of the time, much longer than that. And they got some areas, they were pretty well controlled, some areas not so well controlled. And so what we've seen in our trial is just remarkable. First, we've seen very safe product, which I think is the starting point for any treatment. Our infusions, again, enzyme replacement therapy is an infusion every 2 weeks for about 4 or 5 hours. Ours is a 1-hour infusion, and then that's it, Jim. The expression I like to use is sort of an old proverb. You give a man a fish and he eats for a day. You teach a man how to fish and he eats for a lifetime. That's sort of gene therapy. We take a piece of DNA and we train the body how to make the product for themselves. In our case, with 201 from the liver. And so what we're seeing now is, that approach is working really well. We have all 5 patients out of the efficacy cohort out of 5 have had really dramatic reductions in a biomarker called lyso-Gb1. It measures that harmful substrate that I was talking about that builds up in cells. And so, these patients came in after years of treatment, and we've been able to take all of them down significantly. And I'm talking like 30, 50, 70, 99% reduction in this harmful substrate after being treated with FLT201, where some of them have normal levels now, which is really exciting. We're seeing a huge impact on bone, which is one of the areas that we knew existing treatments couldn't really address just because of the intrinsic properties of the product. And so we've got 5 out of 5 patients having significant improvement in bone burden And you look at the MRIs and you see all these diseased parts of a bone, and then, just 3, 4, 5 months later, you're seeing healthy bone marrow. It's really exciting for us. We also see reductions in pain and fatigue, which is an area of need for some patients. One of the patients in our trial couldn't hold a job, was depressed, really was in quite a bit of pain, had really high pain scores coming in. And now you meet him and he's like a new man. It's remarkable. His full-time job, exercises regularly, pain is down dramatically from where he started. I've been in this industry for a while and I've worked on a lot of projects. As much as the data, those are the kinds of stories that tell me, we're really having an impact. And I think if you have an impact, that's going to translate into success for the product. And so we're super excited about the data that's emerged. We're continuing to follow it. We'll present some more later this fall at a big scientific conference in Rome in October. But we are very much excited about the profile that's emerged and taking it forward into a larger group of patients next year.
Could you tell us a bit about your work on adrenomyeloneuropathy?
Sure. So, adrenomyeloneuropathy is a severe disease. Again, in a lot of ways, similar to some of the treatments that we've talked about to date. It is caused by a mutation, in this case, the ABCD1 gene, which prevents the making of a protein that is critical to breaking down these very long chain fatty acids that accumulate in this case, spinal cord cells and in that setting. And so what this leads to is a severe neurodegenerative disease where patients experience severe pain, mobility challenges, incontinence. From sort of the emergence of symptoms, usually within about a decade or so, patients are reliant on a wheelchair for mobility. There are no treatments today. And so, when we think about an opportunity to leverage gene therapy to change patients' lives, this is an exciting one for us. And our approach is similar, where we're going to administer our treatment. It's SBT101 to provide a healthy version of that ABCD1 gene that allows the patient to make the protein it needs to break down those very long chain fatty acids. And preclinically, we've seen that. We've seen that expression of the protein. We've seen the reduction of the very long chain fatty acids in the right cells. And so now we're in the process of continuing to dose patients in our phase 1/2. I think we've treated, it's 6 patients to date. We're waiting to see the data. It is a neurodegenerative disease, so it takes a bit more time than, say, Gaucher to see that impact. But the early signs are encouraging. The first patient in the trial, we have seen some really encouraging efficacy data in terms of body sway. And these patients have real balance and mobility issues, and they take time to develop. But an early marker for us is body sway, and we've seen an improvement already in patient 1. So we're excited about that. We're going to read out data from all patients in the first half of next year, and then obviously take the program forward depending on what we see.
I guess we've seen quite a few approvals in the gene therapy space. Do you anticipate that there's going to be lots more in the near future?
Yeah, I do. When I look back over the last, 5, 6 years, since the beginning of 2022, I think we've seen 13 approvals in gene therapy, which is, almost 3 times as many as we saw in the prior 3-year period. So I think you'll continue to see that acceleration of gene therapy products getting approved, addressing even more and more diseases. I think right now there are maybe 100 or so clinical trials evaluating gene therapies in various forms of diseases. And so I think the field has continued to invest, has continued to sort of refine our thinking and move it forward. So I do anticipate over the next, handful of years, we're going to see even more approvals. And I think we're going to see some products that have a lot of success if they've sort of met those key parameters that I was talking about in terms of truly changing patients' lives. And we might still have some that sort of don't hit the mark. But I think on balance, we're going to see more of the former than the latter. And I think that's sort of how the field's going to move forward.
How quickly do you see the gene therapy field evolving?
You know this space well. These things take time. There's no doubt about it. I am encouraged by, I think last year, there were more gene therapy trials initiated than any year in our experience in history. And gene therapy has been through a fair amount. The way I look at it is any disruptive technology there's usually a wave of interest and investment and companies formed early on. And there certainly were in the 2015 to 2020 range, where you just saw this tremendous, movement into genetic medicines generally, but gene therapy in particular. And then you kind of go through this progression where there's a fair amount of attrition. Lots of good ideas start out, but unless they really translate into a patient benefit, it's hard to see those companies continue. And that's been hard to see. And that's caused certainly, a tightening of the financial investments attributed to sort of this segment of the market. But I think a lot of strong companies, including Spur, have survived. That to me is a very encouraging sign. And so as we continue to move forward, gene therapy works. That's where I always like to start. Does it work, and can it be done safely? Then it's about fine tuning. Can we not just work, but can we actually be better and really leverage the technology? And there's lots of shiny new technologies out there. There's no doubt about it. Gene therapy has tremendous potential from my perspective, because if a disease can be treated with a therapeutic protein, whether it's genetic or not, there's an opportunity, if you do it right, to use gene therapy to address that disease. That for me sort of creates this unlimited potential in a lot of ways. And certainly at Spur, we see a tremendous opportunity to push the field to bigger and bigger conditions where we can have an outsized impact, leveraging the technology with the right approach, which is, I think, what we're doing.
Well, it's definitely going to be interesting to see the development of new gene therapies over the coming years. Hopefully they are even more successful and wide-ranging as we move forward. So thanks so much to Michael Parini from Spur Therapeutics for his excellent input on the subject. This podcast was sponsored by Vetter, a globally leading CDMO with over 70 years of experience as a responsible independent family business. Driven by more than 6,600 employees worldwide, Vetter provides life-saving injectable drug products to the patients that rely on them the most. Vetter partners with its customers throughout the entire product lifecycle, starting in the early phase of drug development with comprehensive expertise and support in clinical manufacturing for in-human trial material. For more information, visit vetter-pharma.com/labiotech. That's Vetter, vetter-pharma.com/labiotech. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.